Hey everybody, welcome back to Jim's Garage. This is a video I've wanted to do for a while and probably should have done a little bit earlier. But in this video I'm going to show you how to use VS Code to actually manage your remote servers. That includes things like copying over configuration files, editing on the remote host, and even managing your Docker environment. Now, because I've taken a bit of time, Christian Lemper's put out a great video on doing this as well, so do go and check out his video. But I'm going to take this as an opportunity to do it my way, and I'm also going to give you an update on my K3S script. So with that in mind, we'll be able to deploy this to our remote admin machine, and I'll also walk you through what I've changed in the script. In a nutshell, we've basically got rid of the Longhorn nodes and put Longhorn on the workers. That's probably a better balance for a home lab environment and means that you have fewer virtual machines to run, and also you get benefits like being able to set data to be local, i.e. it can run the pod on its own VM and it shouldn't have to go over the network. More on that later. So if you've been watching my videos, you know that I've been using WinSCP, and there's nothing wrong with using that. And I think if you're just getting comfortable with home labbing and remote connections and you want a familiar interface, much like Windows, this is probably a good place to start. But let's take this a step further and let's use something a little bit more advanced. That's right, we can use VS Code. So how do we do that? Well, it's all thanks to this tab over here, which is the extensions. So I'm going to show you first how we can SSH to a remote machine. I'll then show you how to install the Docker plugin, and then I'll give you an example of how to use this as I deploy my new K3S script to a cluster, and we can actually do all of this through VS Code, including things like having nice terminal output, easily creating new terminal sessions, and a whole lot more. Let's get into it. So probably the easiest way to do this, you could just click on extensions and then type SSH, and it will show up here, remote SSH, or you can click in the bottom left. You can click this button here, which is to initiate a remote connection. So either click install here or click on this one down here. I'm going to show this one down here because we want to create an SSH connection. So SSH. It's now installing that application, and you've seen in the background now that this has changed to uninstall. Now, because this is the first time I'm doing this, I need to set up a new SSH host. So I'm going to click that. Now it's going to ask me, well, what's the username and where are they located? So I'm going to say it's Ubuntu, and I'm then going to do an @ and then the IP address. So I'm going to connect to my K3S admin machine, which is 192.168.3.5 in this instance. But importantly as well, this uses certificates for authentication. In my previous videos, I've showed you how to do cloud init, and that expects an SSH certificate. In the Docker example in a moment, we can just use a username and password, and that process is simpler, albeit this one isn't complicated. So if we hit return on that, it's going to ask, well, where do we want to save this? Now, this looks very familiar to Ubuntu or any Linux distribution, where it's going to put it in your user and then the .ssh folder /config. So that's where I'm going to put this one. So now in the bottom right, it says host is added. Do you want to open the config or connect? Now, look what happens when I click connect. It opens up a new instance of VS Code. But let's have a look at what this error message says. Sorry, it's small, but it says it could not establish a connection to that VM. Now, that's because it hasn't got a certificate. So how do we go and fix that? Well, the clue was in the last part. What we need to do is open up that config file we specified, and we need to add an additional line. Let's go and do that now. So over in that folder, that users James SSH folder, we've got the config file. Now, if I click open on this, we'll see that we've got this here. That is the host that I said, that 3.5, the user there, but we actually need one more line, which is to specify the keys. And thankfully, the command we need looks like this. It's simply identify file and then the path to the certs. Now, if you remember in a previous video, those are the ID_RSA if you followed my videos, but you can specify any certificate file that you used here. So in this instance, I need to change this, and I'm going to put C:\\, and then it was users, James .ssh, and then ID RSA. Now I'm going to hit save, and obviously we haven't added these certificates yet. So I can close this down, and I'm going to copy over my certificates from Proxmox into here. Now you can download those from inside Proxmox, or just copy the ones that you've created. And if you're wondering where those are, you can go to your Proxmox node, hit certificates, and then you can view and download them from here. Now that I've got them, I'm just going to paste them into this folder. So here they are, and now they're referenced in that config file. And with any luck, we should be able to reconnect to that session now using these certificates. So if we try to reload this window, fingers crossed it's setting up SSH, it's forwarded, and now it's connected. So if we just enlarge this, and so now we can see in the terminal output that we've connected. Fantastic. So what does that mean we can do? Well, just like the other session, we can click on Files, and then I can say Open a folder. So if I click Open Folder, by default it's going to put me into the home directory. So if I click OK, here we go, we can see everything within that home directory. Now, I've already been testing my script out on this machine, but now in the bottom left, you can see that I'm directly connected to this machine, and thus I can make edits to all of the files on that machine in real time. With the power of VS Code, we don't have to be in any text editors or within the terminal itself. And if you look at the bottom here, we've actually got a terminal into that machine, just like I've been showing you with PuTTY. So we can do things like an ls and see all the files, etc. And we can even do things like kubectl get nodes. And there you can see my new cluster that I spun up earlier. So now I've shown you how to connect using certificates. Let's use an example with a typical username and password, and then also install the Docker plugin so that we can manage the Docker machine. So in this case, I'm going to be connecting to my actual production Docker environment, and we're going to be able to remote manage that through VS Code. How do we do that? Well, it's going to take advantage of what we've just done with SSH, so we'll need to do an SSH connection first, and then we'll need to install the Docker plugin, and then we should be up and running with just one tweak. And that's, we need to add the local user to the Docker group so that we can issue commands and connect to the Docker SOC. Let's get on to that now. So now I'm back in the original terminal I had up first. I've closed down that SSH, and you can see in the bottom left that we're not connected to a remote machine. It's blue, it's not green. So I'm going to click on the blue, and then I'm going to say connect to a host. Now it's remembered the one we've just connected here, but I'm going to add a new one. Now this one is going to be Ubuntu, and it's going to be at a different IP address. In this instance, this is my IP address for my Docker host. And if I hit return, it's going to ask me where to save the config, same file. And then it's going to ask me what do I want to do. In the bottom right down here, there's a shortcut to connect, so I'm going to click that. But if that isn't there, or the next time you're opening it up, you just need to click the button down in the bottom left. So this time, because it's not using certificate-based authentication, it's asked me for a password. So I'm going to stick my password in, and then hopefully it'll connect just like it would do in, say, PuTTY or WinSCP. So hitting return. Yeah, there we go. So let's maximize this, and then we're into this machine. Again, if I click Explorer, open folder, let's go to the root home directory. And here, what do we have? It's actually asking me for my password again. Yes, I trust the author. And then great. It's got all of my Docker files and all of my Docker Compose, which I've been using for these videos. So now we don't have to go in through WinSCP. I can click, I don't know, let's have a look at Authelia. Here's a Docker Compose file, and I can just change this all on the fly. So what can we do now? Well, if you look on the left, I've actually installed the Docker plugin, and you can get that by clicking on extensions, typing in Docker, and then clicking on the Docker here and just installing it. Once you've installed it, you're going to get this symbol on the left. Now, when you click on that, if you haven't got your local user on your sudo group for Docker, you're going to get this permission error here. So I'm now going to add the local user, that Ubuntu user, into the Docker group, and hopefully it should resolve this permissions issue. Now the great thing is, because we're actually SSH'd into this machine, so in the bottom left you can see SSH, we can actually just pull up the terminal and start to fix this problem remotely. So to do that, we need to open up the terminal. So to do that, we can hit F1 and then terminal. And we want to create a new terminal window. So I'm going to activate it in the active workspace, which kind of puts it in a split screen mode. So now we're in the terminal, I'm going to execute this command. So it's going to do a sudo user modify. It's going to add my current user into the Docker group. So when I hit return, it's going to ask for my password. And once I hit return again, hopefully now that's added to the Docker user group. It may be necessary to run the new group Docker as well to refresh the groups, and sometimes it is necessary to physically reboot the VM for these changes to take effect. So hopefully now we can run some Docker commands without the need for sudo. So there I just ran docker ps and it didn't require sudo. So hopefully, fingers crossed, now we should be able to use our existing user to reconnect to this. Now this isn't working, but it recommends that we log out and then log back in. Now if that doesn't work for you the first time, you should be able to reboot the VM and it will refresh those sessions. However, you might not want to reboot your actual Docker running environment. And if you don't want to do that, you can run the following command. You can run a ps and then grep for the bin code server process ID. When you run that, you're going to get the following thing here. And then you want to kill KILL and then this number here, which is the process ID. Once you kill that process, you should be able to reconnect. And then once you do, you can click on Docker and here you go. Here's my Docker environment. You can see all of the files that are associated with that. This is actually going into the container itself. And you can also see all the images it's using and even things like the networks, the volumes that are attached to it. It's pretty awesome. It's a bit like having Portainer, but with all the power of a full-blown VS Code text editor. And you can also do pretty cool things. So for example, you can go to your containers and you can actually shut them down. So you can right click them, you can stop them, you can restart, you can open it in the browser, all of that good stuff. And so if we actually go to the Explorer and we open, say, one of our Docker Compose files, we could actually look at something like this Docker Compose file here for Orthelia, and we could right click and then you can do compose up to actually start this container. So yeah, you can actually start your container within VS Code. How cool is that? So now we have everything we need to remotely manage our Docker environment or any virtual machine that you have with the power of VS Editor. So now let's jump into the second part of this video where I'm going to use this process and I'm going to show you the new K3S script that I've put together. So now if we connect to my cluster admin machine, we should go straight in because we've got the certificate saved. And we can begin the process of now using VS Code only to deploy our cluster. So if I click on the folder structure and then open folder, I'm going to go to the home directory as usual. And now inside here, I'm going to copy over my files. So in this instance, I need the ID RSA, that's my certificates, and I also need the script. So let's have a quick look through the script. Now, if you want a more in-depth detailed guide on this, go and check out my Kubernetes series. I'm only going to briefly go over the parts that have changed, why they've changed, and then show you how to actually run this in the terminal. So all I've done for this one is to go down to this part where I specify the workers, and I've added a third worker. Now, in my previous videos, you know that we've had to have 8 virtual machines. That was 3 masternodes, 2 workers, and 3 Longhorn. Now, we can actually get that down to 6 without really compromising on anything. We're still going to have HA masternodes, but we're also going to then have 3 workers. That's because we're going to install Longhorn onto the workers. That still gives us that HA and it also gives us an additional worker node, which always comes in handy. Now, one thing to note is if you are going this route, you will need to go back into, say, your Proxmox or hypervisor, and you'll want to give your workers now all of the storage that you gave to Longhorn. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. I've simply then added worker 3 to these arrays, and then as we go down to the bottom, I've created more of a monolithic script. So where previously I stopped after the cluster was created, I've then added an automatic deployment of Rancher. So this will automatically deploy Rancher, and then it will automatically go and download and deploy Longhorn. And it'll only install those to the worker nodes because I've specified that it only installs it to where Longhorn equals true. And I've also set the master nodes to be non-schedulable. So no pods can launch on the master nodes, which is good. We want those to be the most stable, and it also means that you can save on a few resources on those VMs. So now that we've copied the script over and we've got both of the certificates in this home directory, we can hop into the terminal. So we hit F1 and then we go to terminal and a new one in the active workspace. And I'm just going to do a chmod 777 for this K3S script. So that's just going to mean that we can execute it, because by default when you create a file it's not executable. Now we can do exactly the same as we did before. So we can do a // and then K3S, hit return, and fingers crossed this should then start running. So yep, this all looks very familiar. It's going to go through, download KS3 up, all that good stuff. I'm going to let this run and I'll see you on the other side, where I'll show you the cluster up and running and also Rancher and Longhorn deployed. The really cool thing is we've got all the power of VS Code. It's a much nicer, snappier interface. Everything looks a lot cleaner. We don't have to have all these additional programs that are open. Also, if you look on the right, we can add new terminals as we're going. So we can just click plus, have as many open as we want. And as we're going through this, you might want to be doing other commands. So you might want to do a kubectl get nodes as you're going through this, whilst the script is still going in the background. Anyway, I'm going to let this run and I'll see you on the other side. And so now that the script is finished, we can actually see that we've got all of the files that it created here on the left, and we've still got the terminal here. So we can actually do things like kubectl get nodes, and it will show all of the nodes that are running. And now if we hop over into Rancher, you can see that, just ignore the names, you can see that we've got 3 masters here and 3 workers. And if we click on Longhorn, we can actually see that within Longhorn, we've got the 3 nodes which are all on the worker nodes. So you'd obviously have to provision those commensurately, but now we have the ability to set all of our volumes to our worker nodes. And you can actually go into the settings and then general. And if you scroll down, you're looking for the following option: default data locality. So I've gone for best effort, which means it instructs Longhorn to try to keep a replica on the same node as the attached volume. It will not stop the volume even if it cannot keep a replica. So that's kind of a halfway house between disabled and strict local. If for any reason it couldn't do it, it should still operate. But the expected behavior is that it runs locally, and so if you've got some nice fast storage on your node, it should use that rather than having to go over the network. And now that we have our cluster up and running, there's a cool extension we can use. So if we head over to extensions on the left, we type in Kubernetes. You guessed it, we can install this now on the remote machine. Let me install that. It may pop up with some dependencies, things like kubectl, minikube, etc., and possibly Helm. Just accept those. But once it's completed, we should have it on the left-hand side here. And if I click that now, it's automatically detected that we've got Kubernetes. In the bottom right down here, you can see that it said there are a number of CRDs. Those are those custom resource definitions, and loading them all might take a long time. This is a new cluster and it's small. I'm going to say enable once, but you choose what you want to do. So I've clicked enable. Now if I look at my cluster, here we can see all of the namespaces, all of the nodes within there. We can even click on some of these things and change the variables. And so let's take an example now. Let me have a look at the workload. This should have the Nginx workload that I deployed as part of this script. Here it is. And so if we look through now the configuration file, I can change replicas. So if we hop into Rancher itself, you can see that I've got Nginx here, and it's only set to one replica. So there's one here, one pod. Let's go into VS Code. Now, what's really cool here is we can right-click Nginx and we can click Scale. And then it says, how many would you like to deploy? So, I don't know, let's say 3. So if I hit 3, that should now scale the deployment. It said it's scaled in the bottom right. If we now hop back into Rancher, here we go. We've got 2 more extra pods spinning up. Brilliant. So now you're able to do Docker, remote SSH, and Kubernetes all through VS Code. This is a much more powerful and elegant solution than what I've been showing previously, and I'll be using this for future videos. Well, thanks for watching everybody, and hopefully now you've got all the knowledge you need to be able to manage your remote machines, your clusters, and even your Docker containers with all the power and the convenience that comes with VS Code. I'm going to be using this method from now on in my videos, so please do familiarize yourself with it. Let me know if you found the update to the K3S script useful and if it's something you're going to do. I am still going to go down the route of putting this into Ansible. I had originally planned to go with JetPorch, but unfortunately that's been cancelled. Anyway, if you've liked this video, hit thumbs up, click subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care everybody.